Copyright and the Computer Regulations Governing Technology, EDL 850 case study. So the case summary: at a school named St. Regis, the school district and school had raised money to buy some computers for a computer lab and software for students to use in the computer lab. The principal, Mr. Sample, had worked closely with the PTA, the school board, and the community in order to add the computers and the software. The school began using the computer lab and the software, and it was a huge success. Kids and classes were in the computer lab all the time, using the computers and the software. And so the librarian, hoping to maximize the software, made copies so that teachers could use it more often in their classrooms with their students. One new teacher in the district, her name was Mrs. Brandon. In her previous district, had been well trained in a copyright violation and understood that this was a copyright infringement. And it went to the librarian to tell her that we probably should not be doing that. The librarian responded by basically saying that everybody would be very happy to know that they were maximizing the dollars spent, and nobody would seem to care that she had made the copies. Miss Brandon, knowing that there could be grave consequences, went to Mr. Sample and explained what had happened. People involved would be the principal, Mr. Sample, the school board, PTA, parents, the larger school community, in addition to the teaching staff and students. Legal and ethical issues. At this point in time, nobody has been legally or physically harmed. We could say that the software company has had some harm done to it through the copy and distribution of their software. However, it's unclear whether this will be require financial retribution from the school district or not. It's important to note here that copyright infringement is against the law, and the school could face heavy financial punishments if they continue to copy materials that they are not supposed to copy. Not only is this a legal issue, but it's also an ethical issue for all staff members, especially the principal. Knowing that this was copied and distributed illegally, the principal has an ethical and legal obligation to deal with the situation. In short, Mrs. Lynn, the school librarian, copied and distributed copyrighted software to teachers to use with students in their classrooms. Some of the key details. So people involved would be Mr. Sample, Mrs. Lynn, Mrs. Brandon, the rest of the teaching staff, the PTA, and the school board. The place was at St. Regis. It involved computers in the computer lab and computers in the classroom and the software. Program affected would be the elementary school curriculum, the computer lab program, and this is taking place in a public school setting. All right, so priorities. It's good for Mr. Sample to remember that the actions of Mrs. Lynn can be damaging for the school district because the software company could pursue damages against the school district, and they would be obligated to pay severe fines. The school district, Mr. Sample, the librarian, and the software company all have a stake in the outcome of this event, and they all have a different view on the event, and so each of them has a different stake, I guess, from their own view. Obviously, the librarian has a stake in this from her actions and belief that they should be able to maximize a dollar spent. Mr. Sample, as a principal, has an obligation to enforce the law, and the software company has to look out for their own financial well-being. Not all the stakeholders have been consulted in the reading. As the principal, you'd have to contact the school board, the central office staff, and the PTA. And I think it'd probably be a good idea to contact the school lawyers. Other information that we could know would be to understand how often the software was used in the classroom, and to know if there had been any previous training done about copyright infringement. And basically, I think the decision here is fairly simple. I think we have enough information to make the decision. There are options. The first option would be to make no decision whatsoever. However, if we do that, the district is going to be open to lawsuits and fines, and for other teachers to break copyright laws when they understand that there is no adherence to the law. And that's also going to be a bad example and message to send to staff. The most extreme action would be to fire the librarian, contact the software company, and let them know we violated their copyright, confiscate the bootleg copies, and suspend access to the computers for everybody. I think the in-between strategies would be to talk with the librarian and require her to take back the copies, work with staff to develop training to avoid copyright infringement in the future, have a discussion with the superintendent and the school board, and develop a plan to add more software in the future. The pros and cons of all those choices: doing nothing. I don't know there's really any pros to this. I guess you could say that as a principal, I wouldn't have to do anything. I would also probably be looking for a new job next year. The cons would be lawsuits, bad leadership, future violations, potentially lose my job, and St. Regis ends up on major news outlets for bad stuff. The fire everybody option. So the pros is that it sends a strong message to the staff, it protects the district, avoids potential lawsuits. The cons are, it seems to be pretty extreme for a first violation. We potentially are going to lose some great staff members. Our staff does not feel supported or understood, and there would be a loss of confidence in my leadership. For the intermediate solutions, I think one of the cons is that it's very time consuming. You want to involve a lot of stakeholders, and maybe it doesn't send a harsh enough message, and we could still be open to lawsuits. However, the pros are that it would show support and understanding of staff, it plans for the future, and it shows ethical decision making. I decided the best option would be to remove the copied software, explain to staff, PTA, and the board and the community what had happened, notify the company about what happened and the steps we have taken to fix the problem, work on training for the future, and develop a plan to purchase more software. As I think about implementation, there are a couple of things to be careful about. And so I would have private conversations with those directly impacted, like Mrs. Lynn and Mrs. Brandon. I would also have a staff meeting to explain to the staff the decisions that we made and the steps that we had to take. And I would support that with examples of the law and times when school districts have broken copyright infringement and the consequences that have come to them. I would send an email to the school community, so parents, just about our new policy on the computer labs and the software. And I would obviously have a meeting with the school board and the PTA to explain what had happened and why the steps were needed. In the implementation, my path again was remove the copies, contact the school board, contact the software company, have a meeting to discuss the seriousness of copyright infringement, talk with Mrs. Lynn and Ms. Brandon in person, and plan for future training. What could happen because of this is that because we're still taking steps to follow the law, but we're also taking away resources from teachers, it's possible that the school staff and some of the community could be upset. It's also possible that Mrs. Lynn and some of the staff members who have been there for a long period of time may blame Mrs. Brandon for not being a team player and creating some animosity amongst staff. This may end up resulting in the staff not supporting the principal. Also, the software company could decide that they need to sue the school district and seek financial retribution. Those are all the bad things that could happen. The good things, obviously, is that everybody would understand the decisions that were made, and in the future would be a little bit more careful in protecting copyright, and the staff would feel like that they were still supported and would appreciate that the principal was transparent in his decision making. Who needs to know? I would definitely contact the school board, the superintendent, and they would need to be supportive and on board with whatever decision that we made. Could I deal with this on my own? And I believe that I could initially deal with this with Mrs. Lynn and the teaching staff. However, she decides that she's not going to be cooperative with my request, and obviously I may have to go to the superintendent to sit down with her as well. When I contact the software company, I think that would be a school district decision, and that would involve probably the superintendent and our lawyers. On the topic of warning, not threatening, I think when we're discussing the removal of the software from the classrooms, I would provide concrete examples of violations and the consequences that have come. And so it's not I'm not threatening, I'm just explaining here's what can happen. And if that plan does not work, then I would reach out to the district office and my superintendent and formulate a plan that may include an official reprimand or removal of position for Mrs. Lynn or for anybody else on the staff that doesn't comply.